Hello and welcome to the Ego Podcast. My name is Dina Jackson and I am your host. We are live from downtown Toronto, Canada, and today I have a wonderful guest with me. She is a speaker, she is an author, she is a psychotherapist, a healer, and a consultant. And she's worked as a consultant for Aboriginal communities with a focus on healing from residential school syndrome, trauma, and addictions. Her book, Enlightenment, is Letting Go. Here it is currently available in stores and online. And she is currently working on a second book right now that will be published by the University of Toronto. Please welcome Dr. Teresa Marsh. Welcome.
Thank you so very much, Dina, for this opportunity for me to be able to be sitting with you in downtown Toronto studio. And it's really an honor to be here. And as I listened to some of your previous podcasts and just listening to you, it just brought light and happiness to my heart to know that as a young person, you are just embracing everything that we are made of, but particularly spirit, which is often left out of the equation.
Oh, so you keep giving me goosebumps.
So, Dina, as an Indigenous person, as an Indigenous square, that's woman in Ojibwe, we always start off with situating ourselves. So my given Christian name is Teresa. My Muslim name is Nasiba, and my Ojibwe Cree spirit name is Makanakwe, Turtle Woman. I was born in South Africa and into violence, into apartheid. And my mother was Indigenous from Cape Town, South Africa. She's in spirit world now for a very long time. And my father came from, his ancestors was brought from Indonesia through the Dutch East Indian Company when they started moving all around the ocean, picking up poor people, slaves from those different areas. So they brought lots of people from Malaysia and Indonesia to Cape Town, South Africa to work on the sugar plantations there. So my ancestors from my dad's side from Indonesia. So they met, fell in love, and so I grew up with both Indigenous as well as another Indigenous, but with both Islam and Christianity. So at that given time, I was already exposed to all the differences that exist in different nations. I have 9 siblings. We were 8 girls and 1 boy. The Ahmad, my brother's in spirit world, he died young. And one of my sisters just passed on, Fatima, 4 years ago. They're all in South Africa. And I'm the only sibling that left South Africa and came to Canada in 1992. I came to Canada because as a freedom fighter and as an Indigenous person there and a single mom too, at that time when I left, I had my 3 kids. I have 3 kids, and they were pretty young still when I left as a single mom. And I came to Canada to heal. I came to Canada to get away from the violence, to get away from the oppression. And luckily for me, as a registered nurse and a registered midwife and a registered psychiatric nurse, I had that opportunity given to me to actually pack up as a single mom with my 3 kids with $5,000
Canadian dollars?
Canadian dollars in my pocket.
Wow.
1992.
Wow.
So, did I find healing in Canada? Oh, yes, and much, much more.
Ah. Teresa, can I just say that you have you have such a presence. Like your presence is so warm and bright. The moment that like I need listeners to hear this, that like the moment I received an email from you, I got goosebumps. And I'm not just saying that. And every time you talk, I get more, and they're beautiful. I love them. I haven't enjoyed getting goosebumps this much before.
Oh,
You, everything that you say, I just feel completely, you're very captivating. I think that, you know, I just feel completely engulfed, and I just want to hear more. So I'm so excited for this interview. I'm very grateful. Your partner, husband, Dr. David Marsh, was recently a guest on the Ego podcast, and was speaking about some of his work at Greenstone treatment facility in Muskoka, Ontario.
yeah.
And when I first met him, almost within 5 minutes of us meeting, he said, "You need to interview my wife." And he couldn't be more correct. I'm already just glowing. So thank you for being here.
So welcome.
I have
Such an honor.
Likewise. And you led us in a beautiful meditation prior to this recording. And so a lot of listeners know that we start off with a meditation for every guest. And there's also the free meditations available for listeners who are interested in trying meditation, or there's some longer and shorter ones. And so, but you led in such a beautiful, there was a mindfulness component, there was a body scan component, and it was just so calming. And your approach, which I'll definitely ask you about a little bit later, about how you encompass every part of your being when you work with your clients or in any situation. I feel like you're doing that now. I want to dive into that. But before we do, I want to ask you a little bit about your work. So I appreciate you explaining where you've come from. I think that's it's so beautiful. I have so many questions. But specifically your work with trauma, because that's something that you have really been focused on, and particularly what brought you to working with trauma. You had mentioned that you came to Canada to heal, and that you found that and so much more. So it sounds as if you've done some of your own healing, and then now you're bringing that towards other people, which is wonderful. So I'd love to hear a little bit about your work and what brought you to this point.
I think what I just want to say first, Dina, that everything is in everything. Everything is connected. Mm-hmm. And I might move back and forth in the stories, and I love storytelling. My book, Enlightenment is Letting Go. It's all the chapters are about how people came for healing to me, and how I use mind, body, spirit, soul connection to help them heal. But it's also written through storytelling and poetry. So I love storytelling, and stories are so very, very important. And we all have our stories to tell. Mm-hmm. So how did I get here? When I was, as I said already at the beginning, I grew up in violence. Mm-hmm. I was born into violence. When the earth stood still for the very, very first time, and that was because I must have been about 4 or 5. I can't remember, but I remember specifically that day because nobody spoke to me. I came from, I wasn't even in school yet. I was playing in the backyard, and everything just became quiet. And I was very perceptive as a child, just exactly as I'm right now, you know, with light coming from my eyes. I'm curious as a child still. And I was looking around, and everyone looked frightened and scared around me. I wasn't really frightened and scared. But then when I heard what the adults were talking about the blacks, they burned all their dom passes. So the whites, the colonizers, gave them, for the first peoples in South Africa, they couldn't move around unless they had this, what they call the dompas, right? Just horrific. So they decided at that time to burn that, you know, for liberation, to say no. And what I did was at that time, and that was my introduction to meditation, and this is blood knowledge, because nobody taught me about meditation at that time. But I ran into the backyard and I took my little hands and I shoved it into Mother Earth. And I held it there in Mother Earth, and I could feel Mother Earth's connection, grounding me and holding me and supporting me. And I might have shed a few tears there, but that's how I started soothing myself. Feeling that, I guess, the fight-flight in my little embodiment, I didn't know at that time. When I was 8 years old, few years later, I was sexually abused by a family member in the middle of the night. So I don't want to go into detail about that because it doesn't matter at this time. That experience brought me to where I am right now. Maybe as a teaching, I don't know, but at that time it was horrific. But the thing was, I felt I couldn't tell my mom. I didn't tell my mom. I didn't tell my dad. I didn't tell anyone, but I was petrified. And one thing I know, that my life changed at that time, changed inside of my embodiment. You have to understand, that time I didn't know that trauma resides in the body, because I was fight, flight, freeze, right? I remember I went to school the next day and I wanted to tell my teacher, Miss Abdullah, because I was very close to her. But I didn't. When I wanted to tell her, I put my head on my desk and I felt shame. I felt dirty and I felt scared again. But what happened there is that an 8-year-old, I knew that I shouldn't be near that man again, that he's never going to do that to me again. And I started protecting myself. And I became this little self-protector for myself. How did things change for me? Maybe more within my embodiment. I became maybe more quiet, more introspective, and sometimes very sad. And but I started excelling even more in school. I was always first in class, and I found this thing that I loved knowledge, and I just wanted to learn, and I just wanted to read and know stuff, and that's I think that became my soothing balm. That really, really helped me. In retrospect, I didn't know that was the path that brought me to where I am right now. But one thing my mom told me, at one point, she said, when you were born, so I'm the 7th born of the 9 siblings, when you were born, and all my mom's kids were born in her own bed by a midwife, and the midwife, Nurse Kakana, she was a spiritual healer. So my mom said I was the only premature, so as opposed to coming early October, I came the 9th of August, which is coming up soon. And Nurse Kakana said to my mom, she looked at my mom, when she looked at me, she said, Asa, here's my healer. She's finally born. Here's my healer. She's finally born. And she's going to be a nurse. My mom told me. And for as long as I can remember, I was probably 5, 6 or that. I'd take newspapers, put a newspaper apron on, newspaper cap on. I'm a nurse and I'm helping people. I'm a nurse and I'm helping people. Right. And then I remember one day my dad asked me, why do you want to do nursing? You can do anything else. You know, you're going to have to carry bedpans and all of that. Why you want to? I said to my dad, Dad, I know one thing. I'll say it in Dutch, in Afrikaans. It's my first language. Ek was gebore om my medemens te help. I was born to help humanity. That's what I told my dad. So they left me alone.
How old were you when you said that?
Probably round about 11 or so.
So you've always known.
Yeah, so I always knew. And I finished school. I was 17 when I started nursing. My dad took me to the nursing college. First time I was away from home, but I was just excited. Graduated when I was 20, but in between, sorry.
No,
I
I
had
love
my
all
first
this.
baby because I got pregnant, but I just had the baby and carried on,
Wow.
And anyway, so that was the beginning of my nursing career. But what I knew also I wanted to do was to be a psychiatric nurse.
Wow.
So I finished my general nursing RN. Year later, I went to my boss. Okay, now I need to go and do. Well, we had to do midwifery too. So I did my 3 years RN. I did my year of midwifery. They wanted me to stay in midwifery. They told me in midwifery, oh my God, you have magic hands. I delivered how many? 38 babies,
Wow.
And they said, you should be a midwife, Teresa. I'm like, no, not that kind of midwife, midwife of the head, right?
Right.
And
I like that. Midwife of the head.
so a year later, not even a year later, I went back to my hospital. It was Grooteskië Hospital. Actually, I was at Grooteskië Hospital where the first heart transplant was done by Professor Chris Barnard.
Wow.
And I was a young nurse, probably 18 or so. You remember the second heart transplant was with a black woman, Dorothy? And so she had a psychosis, and they only, because that time we still had white nurses one side, black nurses one side, white units one side, black units. So she only had white nurses, and then they said they needed a black nurse. So there was a black nursing sister or a black RN, and they asked me if I wanted to go and take care of that. So I talked to Professor Chris Barnard.
That's so cool.
Yeah. So anyway, where was I now? So
now you wanted to become a
now
midwife
psychiatric
of the head.
nursing.
Yeah.
So very soon I said to the matrons there, psych, I have to go for my year psych training now. Psych. Yeah. So they got me in right away. Right. I didn't give up. Okay, go do your psych nursing, and that's where I began to have these amazing experiences with looking at the trauma, intergenerational trauma, and also when I did my 3 months rotation in addiction, every single history I took of a person with addiction, if you go back and do the family history, there's a history of trauma, neglect. Of course, for us too, at that time, I guess my mind didn't function like that, but knowing that all that we've gone through, the colonization, the oppression, the wars and fighting, Nelson Mandela going to prison, people dying, Steve Biko, all those people dying in prison, how people just went to prison if they talked the truth, So all of those things, of course, it led to people's trauma. And people were using at that time in my psych rotations, it's a lot of alcohol. Alcohol was probably on top of the list, and then the marijuana, and they added pills to the marijuana, and so on, and then all the other stuff. So it was rampant. People drank around me a lot.
So you saw that kind of.
So I saw that, and I remember I told my boss, Dr. Ramsey Carroll, so he's also in Spirit World right now. He was the first black psychiatrist in South Africa. I was always telling Ramsey and also my professor that there's a link, there's a big link between addiction and trauma, and we must be treating those two together then already. And of course, we in South Africa, we were treating trauma and addiction integratively, and trauma and addiction, mental health and addiction, it was together.
Right.
It's only when I came to Canada in 1992, I realized that addiction treatment centers were out there, trauma treatment, mental health on the other side, right?
Not seeing
That's
the connection.
changed a big deal right now, but that's how it was. And that was my discovery of how we get impacted by our own trauma. Because when I came to Canada in 1992, I started working at Mount Sinai Hospital. And I'm also a certified oncology nurse. So when I left, I was working in oncology. And I wanted to work in oncology, so I took a position at Mount Sinai Hospital as a nurse, went back to floor nurse at that time. And that's where I met David, Dr. David Marsh. And he came from Newfoundland. I came from South Africa, and we connected. We fell in love. 9 months later, we were married.
Aww.
Took me with my 3 kids, and he's my soulmate. And it feels like I just met him yesterday.
Oh, I love that.
I love him very much, and we just love each other.
And it's very clear from his perspective that the feeling is definitely mutual. That's beautiful. And I like that listeners get to listen to you and him, and they get to hear both of your perspectives.
One of the things he told me when I asked him, why did you become a doctor, a medical doctor? He said to me, I became a doctor to help love grow.
Oh. You guys are both healers through and through. That's beautiful. So you're a registered nurse. You're a registered psychologist, psychotherapist.
Yeah.
And you are I'm trying to keep track of all you're also certified to teach yoga, Ashtanga yoga. And so I wanted, there's so many things I want to unpack from what you were just sharing. But one thing that you mentioned was that trauma lives in the body. And I'm wondering if you can address that for a moment, because this is something that I find particularly fascinating. Teaching yoga myself and meditation myself, but particularly anything that involves movement, and seeing that with students. So I'm wondering if you can elaborate on that and how you see trauma as existing in the body.
Okay, where do I start right now? I'm thinking, which way do I go in? I'll give you just a little bit of a background, how I moved into the yoga. Like I said, I've already meditated all the way. I've done yoga.
Right.
But when I worked at CAMH and I started working with people with trauma and addiction, working and bringing that together and starting that first trauma and addiction group, I realized, I knew this, it's blood knowledge again, that there is a connection and we should be treating the two together.
Right.
Many of our clients at CAMH at that time, they fell through the cracks because the psychiatrist would say no if the people come for trauma treatment and they're using addiction. No, you first have to be clean. Then we can work with that. That's how it was. And it was also very much separate
yeah.
Right? So what I did was one day I sat and I just thought, trauma is in the body. I know it. I've been traumatized. I've been colonized. I've been severely traumatized. And I know it's here. The discomfort is here. When I'm with strange people, or when I'm frightened, or if somebody just shout at me, I know something is happening in my embodiment. Something is happening inside of me. So, of course, I know that already. So, I think I'm just going to work 50% of the time, find a yoga teacher, do a yoga for a year, and then incorporate yoga and meditation in my practice and work with people's bodies. So that's how I started my yoga teacher training with Catherine Beat. And she was just amazing. And she told me straight up, I think we were 24, 25 teachers, student teachers. And one day she called me one side and she said to me, you carry spirit with you. And I know that you are going to teach yoga in a different way. And it would be good for you to finish your Ashtanga training. But maybe you should think about maybe Kundalini, or if you can. I said, oh, absolutely, I am going to incorporate this. But I explained to her too. I said, I'm a psychotherapist. Right. I'm a trauma therapist. I work with people that are severely traumatized and that their nervous systems are severely compromised. And I want want to help them with that, but I know it's in the body, and I know we have to find a way to work with the body to get in the body. And if I teach people yoga and in the yoga studios, I can begin to incorporate that. And that's how I started the trauma work in the yoga studios when I was teaching, just teaching people about, where the difficulties is, where the little trauma vortexes, the pieces of trauma sitting in the body, and so on.
I love that. Sorry, can we just go back to that for a moment? Trauma vortex. I really like the way that you said that. So basically, areas in the body where trauma resides. So for someone to have a traumatic experience, they then store that somewhere. It becomes stored, and it's a really beautiful thing when they can release that, but they're not always necessarily aware of it.
Right.
And so I'm guessing that through your work you're helping them become aware of it, not just on a mental side, not even just on a physical side, but then also using the emotional, the spiritual, and then the components of the soul as well to recognize all of that.
Yeah. So I'll just briefly explain to the audience about the trauma, and maybe for some people they are very much familiar with it, but the brain science and so on. So what I always tell my clients when I start working with them, we are born to heal, we are born to heal, we are born to heal. When Creator created us with this innate ability to protect ourselves when we are exposed to any form of danger, right? And so what I usually do is just make like an egg circle and just dividing the three brains, right? So the top part of the brain is the cortex, right? So the thinking brain, the part that we need that to be able to study, to be able to read, to be able to make notes, to be able to keep appointments. We need that. We need that part of the brain. The biggest part is the middle part of the brain, and that is the limbic system that we also refer to as the emotional brain. So that part of the brain, that is also where traumatic memories and that stored there, but that's our awareness, that's the emotional component of where our emotions and that reside. That's the biggest part of the brain. But the little part at the bottom there that we refer to as the primitive brain, or the brain stem, or the reptilian brain, that is the part of the brain that has been programmed for us to be able to protect ourselves when there's danger. So what happens? There's danger out there. We see that danger. We see it coming. The senses let us know that the minute that's taken up to the brain, boom, you don't have to do anything anymore. You have no control over that. Your body, as you go into fight, flight, freeze mode or autonomic nervous system mode, basically what happens is when that happens, a humongous amount of natural medicine, adrenaline is set free in your body. These big muscles here in your body, in the thighs, in the back and that, they really get so tightened up and they get revved up with so much energy. Oxygen, more oxygen is pumped to those areas. That's why the heart is pumping faster. You're breathing faster because everything is hyped up to help you either to fight your way out of it. If you can't fight your way out of it, you're going to run away from that danger if you can. Or the third one is you freeze. So freeze, you're still very much present, but it's like the mouse playing dead for the cat to save yourself, right? And so those three come into place: fight, flight, freeze. But here's the thing. Trauma is that humongous, big, abnormal. It's an abnormal event that overwhelms the person. So much so that at that time when that trauma happened, whatever it is, you feel you are going to die. So it's humongous. So what happens, even though the body was ready to protect us, this trauma coming, this force is coming, and it just, the trauma actually happened. You see, the other thing that the reptilian brain will do too, it will hijack our thinking brain. Because you can't think your way through how you're going to get out of this.
Right.
That is why I always say to people in work areas and that, if you're working under a lot of pressure, a lot of stress and that, it's not good because you're not thinking straight. When you activate it here, your thinking brain is really hijacked by your reptilian brain.
Right.
So here's the first three things that come into play then. When that happens, you're actually being traumatized.
Right.
Whether it's sexual abuse, and I don't want to become graphic about it. I usually use a story here, but I'll just leave it at that. Whatever that trauma is, think about a little girl that get overwhelmed. I can use myself, how I got overwhelmed by this big force, right? I couldn't fight, I couldn't flight, I couldn't freeze, right? So the trauma actually happened. That humongous amount of energy that you have, that came up in your body to help you, gets trapped.
Right.
It gets trapped. That's like the vortex, the trauma that's sitting around. It gets trapped in the body, right? Three things come into play right away at that given time. The body's thinking, I failed, because we are born to protect ourselves. So the body's saying, I failed, right? So what do we feel?
The
Shame,
yeah.
guilt, and we are disempowered. So those are the three things that plague people that have been traumatized right away. Shame, guilt, and that. In South Africa, when I left South Africa, every 5 minutes of the day, a woman was raped. I worked with hundreds of rape victims. When they come in, that's what they say. I could have done something. It's my fault. And the shame that they feel, even though it wasn't their fault.
Right.
Wasn't their fault.
The trauma overcame
Wasn't
them.
their fault. The trauma overcame them. So that trauma, that stuff it's sitting in the body. The only thing that's left. The reptilian brain come out of autonomic nervous system mode and releases the thinking brain. And this is where the confusion come in. This is where that brain begin to tell you, Teresa, from now on, we're not safe anymore. From now on, we always have to be ready. From now on, we're always going to be in
This mode.
fight, flight, in this mode. Because otherwise, from now on, you can't trust. And so on and so forth.
Right.
That is what happened. And slowly and gently, if we look at the DSM-5, if we look at all the symptoms that they've listed for complex trauma, it's humongous. It's just so much. Depression, anxiety, flashbacks, nightmares, all of that, panic attacks. Many women get wrongly diagnosed with bipolar. Then it's not really bipolar. When I see someone I know as a healer, no, that's not bipolar. That person have been traumatized. They've just walked around what we call with a compromised nervous system now. Had nobody picked that up. Maybe I did that. I walked around with a compromised nervous system. But here's the thing. The beautiful thing that too, we are wounded and whole at the same time. A lot of people, and I specifically want to talk to the indigenous peoples here, the first peoples here, started working with them 17 years ago in Vancouver. And even though I saw the most horrific or heard the most horrific stories about trauma, that what happened in the residential school with the young kids that were taken away from their parents, it's a Holocaust. It was genocide, right? But in the same vein, you also see the resilience.
Yep.
The resilience that is there at the same time. Maybe not in everyone, but it's there. You see that. I go to I'm doing some trauma training now up in James Bay Coast, right? Got some great funding from the Northeast Lynn provincial government, and they asked me to go up to those 6 communities there, Kasashawan. I've been at Fort Albany twice. I'm going to at the Wappiscat, Moose, Moosonee and Moose Factory, those communities up there.
And this is where you're doing your work.
It's all fly-in communities. So the higher you go, it's really, I urge you Canadians, if you really want to see, go and have a look and see how people live and what it's still like here. In Canada, we have a lot of work to do, So, so basically, that is what happened when people get traumatized, right? Now, here's the thing, coming to the addiction piece. So I'm just going to go straight, and I'm like, okay, I'm also an addiction therapist. All the people that I've ever worked with, young people, the youngest person that was an addict was 7. My youngest client was 7, 8, 9, 10. I had, when I was the manager for the substance abuse program for African, Canadian, and Caribbean youth at CAMH, Sapasi. Yeah, I had clients, I had young African, Caribbean young men of 11. They all have already been in the legal system.
Wow.
Yes. They were already recruited by drug dealers to be runners. They had to do that because they were sometimes feeding their families, So when I ask these young people, when you do a addiction history, when did you start using? They tell you. When you took that first joint or that first alcohol and that, what did you feel? Oh my, for the first time I felt normal. I felt good. It took away all this horrible stuff that I've been feeling all the time in my body. I don't feel that. It feels good,
I feel whole again.
Whole again. So here's the thing. We all know that feeling of wholeness. Because we are born like that. We were born like that when Creator created us, and in my culture, from my Islamic side, from my culture, when you're still in utero, Creator comes at a certain point and blow his breath into you. So in the Christian faith, we say, you were created in the image of God, right? We are created in the image of God. We're all brothers. So it's the same. So we have that spirit. And what I say to people is that in order for us to heal from both trauma and addiction, we have to, for both, because they're both diseases of the brain, right? We have to come home to this embodiment. The healing is coming back home.
Right, not running away.
Because the traumas disconnected us. We don't want to be here. It's uncomfortable to be here. We take substances to numb ourselves out, to take the pain away. So it's like your body's crying. Say you're feeling sad, or you're anxious, or you're just feeling so horrible inside. So your body's saying, something's wrong, something's wrong, right? And you say, shut up, just gonna go get something and drink, and so that I can get high, so we don't have to feel this crap. And I know when I was working in BC, at the supervised injection site, I talked to many of the women there that came up to the site, when they helping them, when they use their drug. And you try to do a little bit of motivational interviewing. It doesn't have to be like this and that. And they would say to me, Teresa, if you take away the substances, if I don't use, if I don't get my fix, my medicine, you don't want to see what's going to come out. You have no idea how much stuff I'm carrying in here. I cannot live with it. It's too freaking painful. I cannot live with it. So that is really how it is. So we move away. But here's the thing. What does Kabur Mate in his work and in his book, he says, It's not the addiction. The addiction is the trauma. There's trauma. So he's right. There's trauma.
The starting
there.
point. Yeah.
Yeah. And that it's really so powerful. It's very, very powerful. So guess what people are after? Once they begin to numb the trauma pain and shut it down, what are they after? They're after that connection, because that is what is missing, that connection that they don't really have. And I tell many of my clients that the addiction is like a warm, fuzzy blanket that you wrap yourself in for that time just to get a break from everything. It's a warm, fuzzy blanket. And that warm, fuzzy blanket, you know what that is? That is actually the nurturing that we want as human beings. I think it was in one of your podcasts, the lady was not the lawyer, she was an performer too.
Oh, psychotherapist Elaine Smokler, was she?
Yeah, Elaine Smoker. She also, in her work talked a little bit about that, where she differentiate between the happiness and the pleasure. So when we go after the pleasure, it's a temporary release,
Right.
a temporary relief. And she talks about the release of the dopamine. Right? And the dopamine that gets released when we're hungry and we have a nice meal, that dopamine is coming. But with the addiction, when we smoke a joint or 2 joints or take several, the minute we do that, there's a humongous amount of dopamine that gets released in the brain.
Right.
A lot. And sometimes the body don't even know what to do with all this dopamine. That's why we really feel good. But
Right.
it also leaves pretty fast.
Right. Then you
But
want
then
another one.
that is the thing. And that is, David probably talked about it
Yeah.
in when he talked about addiction, about how the reward pathway in the brain, the nucleus, how that gets affected because of the substances. So here's the thing, listeners and people that have problems with trauma and addiction, I want to tell you right now that both trauma and addiction, they are both no-fault diseases. It was not your fault. It was not your fault. It was not your fault. And if you can look at that as the first line of treatment for yourself, it was not your fault. You can move away from the self-loathing, the hurting yourself, because look, we were not created to hurt ourselves. And when I see as a healer and an addiction trauma therapist that somebody comes to me and they're hurting themselves, I know that there's a trauma history, whether we remember that or not.
Right.
And here's the other thing. Hurt people.
Because it perpetuates. Yeah.
Hurt people. And I just want to urge everyone there, particularly the young people that are struggling with addiction and trauma, to know that you're not just addicted because it's fun. You became addicted unknowingly because there's trauma there. And it's there. Your body's actually telling you that every day when you're feeling sad, when you're feeling unhappy, when you're feeling disconnected, when you feel discontent. And what we need really is that human connection. And just saying that, I'm just thinking, I talked earlier on about the resilience of the indigenous peoples that I see. Now, their connection to the land and their culture and their traditional practices and that, right? With colonization, all of those things were banned. It was taken away from them. The mere things that really sustain them as nations, for us too, as nations, all those things were taken away from us by the colonizers.
So
and
traumatic.
they wanted us to go to their side as we were the savages. But we were not. We were different. We were connected to our land, to the water spirits, to everything in creation that's so sacred, right? And all of those things in creation that was so sacred when that was taken away really from us, what did we have left to sustain us when we're going through difficult times? When all those kids were taken away from people on the reserves, from the parents, torn away from the parents, and took to the residential schools, right? To be what is the word?
Exploited?
In culture, like change, you know. It was extremely traumatic. And the people that were left behind, and of course the colonizers brought in the alcohol and that. So that's what happened, right? So it just numbing, and still happening.
Yeah.
Right? Still happening.
Continuing on with abuse.
Yes, it's continuing on. And here's the thing. I started asking when I was going up, when I was in BC, when I started working with the indigenous communities, and I saw the trauma and how people were stuck in their trauma. I asked the question, why are people stuck in this trauma? What is it that we are not doing? Why are they stuck in their trauma? We've got to find ways to get them unstuck. And that was my research question that took me to go and do my PhD at University of Laurentian University. So what I did was, my beautiful friend Dr. Lisa Nudjewicz, she came in 2002 and with the first manualized treatment to treat trauma and addiction integratively. Empirical studies about this that she tested in all different cultural groups, right? So she has probably now over 40 empirical studies in that. So it's scientifically proven that she brought in that manual. It's called Seeking Safety. And I love the name, Seeking Safety, treating trauma and addiction together like this, teaching people why it's together like this,
right, they're not
helping
separate.
people understand why it's like this, and giving them tools to keep them, to begin to heal, to keep themselves safe, to give them tools to be able to deal with when they're having red flags and green flags, when they're having triggers, when they're struggling with both the trauma and the addiction. So I was very much familiar with her model. Like, she really brought us an amazing gift. And so what I did for my PhD, I took her model, Seeking Safety, and I added Aboriginal traditional healing practices to her model. And I created a hybrid approach.
That's beautiful.
Calling that, I use the concept of two-eyed seeing. And two-eyed seeing, a term was coined by Elder Albert from Nova Scotia. He was in residential school. And he said, for us as Indigenous peoples, to be able to see from the one eye with the strength and wisdom of Western knowledge and ways of knowing, and to be able to see from the other eye with the strength and wisdom of Indigenous ways of knowing, and to bring the two together so that we can bring healing to all. So I created this model. Now it's called Indigenous Healing and Seeking Safety. And so, of course, it's a novel.
Right.
It's the first time. And what I did was I offered it to 12 Aboriginal men and 12 Aboriginal women in Northern Ontario, Canada, up there in Sudbury. And I used both qualitative and quantitative inquiry. So, of course, for the qualitative, initially I was just going to use the qualitative inquiry by just focus groups and semi-structured interviews, individual interviews. But then I also added the quantitative piece, the number piece. So I had 4 tools there. The Trauma Symptom Checklist 40, that is a very, very beautiful questionnaire and research tool to look at trauma and changes in trauma. I used the ASI, the Addiction Severity Index Light, because that was more culturally sensitive, to look at all the problems with the addiction. I used the Whitebeck's historical loss and historical grief scale. So Professor Whitebeck is from the United States. He's a Caucasian, but he worked with elders in the States. So the elders came up with that tool, looking at historical loss of land, loss of culture, loss of language, and all of that. And the grief one was, so when you experience those losses, how do you feel? So I used that scale, which was absolutely phenomenal. And then the fourth one was Dr. Lisa Najewitz's end of session questionnaires. Figure out what was the session like for you, what did you take home, what did you learn, and so on.
Wow.
So I offered it, and the Seeking Safety sessions was offered in Seeking Safety is offered in a group format, but I use sharing circles. So we created sharing circles. I trained Aboriginal and Indigenous practitioners to actually run the group over 3 months. So it's 25 sessions, 2 hours at a time. So it was a huge commitment for the participants to commit for 3 months.
Right.
They didn't have to be clean and sober. They could still be using and dabbling. The whole idea of Seeking Safety is to get them to safety. So it's teaching them during that time
How to get
why they're using, how they were traumatized in the body, how that happened for them, that, and then making the connection with their own embodiments, and then doing the work here. Amazing stuff. Amazing. Wow. So we use the sharing circles. We use elders to be present in the circle. We used, we smudged, open up with smudging, just cleaning the space. Everyone got tobacco ties. We used sacred drumming. We used the sacred feather, eagle feather, for people to talk.
And incorporating all the things that were taken.
Everything that was taken, we brought that back. So the outcome from baseline to post, 55% change.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, everything just came down like that.
Right.
It's a small sample size, but it was all statistically
So
significant.
you're providing that support on so many levels.
It was just amazing. And just to let viewers know that I will give my website in the end. I've got 5 published papers now on that research in amazing journals. It's available for you on the website. You can download it. You can share it with people. Read those. It's absolutely phenomenal. The outcome of that.
I think that we do have to go quite a little bit short in a couple of minutes, maybe 1 or 2 minutes. We have to go, but I'm so moved by everything that you just shared, Teresa. There's so much there, and I think it's wonderful that listeners have access to learn more about the work that you're doing, because right now you're very much focused on renegotiating trauma. And so one last thing I just wanted to ask you on top of all of this work that you've just shared is that we touched on this a little bit at the beginning, but just how you work with the spiritual, the emotional, and the psychological and the physical encompassing, which it sounds like is something that you were doing here and having such amazing results. And you lead with spiritual. And I was just wondering if before we go, you could let listeners know why you choose to lead with spiritual.
Well, because first of all, we are spiritual beings in a physical body. I mean, that's really a fact. We all have a spirit. We all have a soul. The way I look at it this is from my perspective as an Indigenous woman, right? This vessel, this container that Creator has given us, this embodiment, container, this vessel, was given to us to house our most precious gem, our spirit, our soul. That's basically how it is, right? And no matter what happens to you, no matter how severe the trauma, this embodiment will protect. So that's why the body got really, really traumatized, right? During a traumatic experience. This is the protective mechanism. And in order for us to heal from that trauma is to come back here. How do we come back here? That is basically a spiritual journey. That is spirit. It's not something out there. It's already here. It's coming home to this embodiment. It's coming home to the self. Is coming home to the space in whichever way you see that. And for me, spirituality is when you come back home and you begin to understand your original oneness and goodness and why you were created and why you were here, that is the connection to spirit, because then you will feel that. There is something greater and vaster than anything else that we can ever see physically. And that is the unseen, but it resides in all of us. So basically for me, it's coming home to this embodiment, reconnecting with that. The reason why I put spirit first too is, even when I was doing my master's in psychology, not one professor even mentioned spirit. When did spirit disappear? Right? Why are we in dire straits? Because spirit has been taken out of the equation, right? As I said, when you say, what is that? What is that spirituality? But I understand, even for the indigenous peoples, right? The spirit, people came to South Africa in the name of God to say God chose those people to come to sort out us, the savages, the first people of our land. So they came in the name of God and did that to people. But it wasn't creator, it wasn't God, it was people who did that, all that nonsense. The same with the indigenous people. Where the people that were injured and hurt, it was all the churches. It was priests, right, that preyed on young kids. So they came in the name of so-called spirit. But there's a huge difference between spirit and then God and that. And spirit is here, and we are connected to that energy here. And spirit is everywhere. It's in everywhere. It is in every tree, every plant, every rock. There's water spirits. It's everywhere. Everything is in everything. Creator is the omnipotence, the omnipresence, the force, the source, great spirit. It's everywhere. And that's basically why we cannot move away from it. We cannot, because it's there all the time. Just being able to see the love in your eyes, Dina, and the fact that you are committed to what you want to do for humanity, it's just amazing. To me, that is spirit.
Everything that you're doing and saying is spirit.
And it's the same with mindfulness meditation and the yoga. You know, my dad taught me that. He was also a spiritual healer. He said, my daily life is my temple and my religion. Whenever I enter it, I take with me my all. And so that connection to others, us as helpers and healers, helping other people, reaching out, wanting to make this world a better place, all that is a spiritual practice, right? And you can talk to Creator or your higher power or God, Buddha, whatever you can do it in any way. And I've studied all the different religions. It's the same. It's the same as Buddha said. It's just coming home.
Right.
And being inward. Here and knowing here and living in that awareness, right? You see somebody outside hurting, you're going to go out there. We come back to that love. And for me, spirit, I'll end here, spirit is love. That's what we all want. That's what we're looking for. We want that connection and we want that love.
Thank you so much, Teresa. It's beautiful. I'm very moved. I don't want to start crying in the middle of the recording. For anyone listening or watching, please check out Enlightenment is Letting Go by Dr. Teresa Marsh. It's available online and in stores. And could you share your website as well for listeners if they'd like to hear some of your talks or find more of your published journals and things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the website is traumahealingguru.com. And the password is 2017. So it's open to everyone. Everything is on there. My PowerPoints, my published papers. There's recordings of me talking about trauma. And if you go to links, you'll see all of that down there. It's very easy to navigate through the website.
Okay. Thank you very much for joining us today, Teresa, and thank you for everyone for listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Dina.